Hello and welcome back to another episode. Today I want to share with you a story. My diabetes story. I know this isn't your normal YouTube content, your normal sort of fare for this type of channel, and in fact today I had planned on recording a video that was 5 things I've learned since I started playing D&D. And that will probably be my next video, if I'm honest. But this morning I felt compelled to talk a little bit about and share my experience combating type 2 diabetes. Over the past 10 months, certainly the best part of the past 10 months, I have been actively aware of and combating diabetes. I was actually diagnosed 2 days after my birthday. So on the 13th of September I was diagnosed. My birthday is the 11th of September. And since then it's been something which has been a struggle and a part of an ongoing effort in my life. But it has been increasingly something which I've been on top of, and which thankfully now isn't really an issue. And I'll come back to all of that in a bit. But prior to being diagnosed in September, I had been extraordinarily stressed. I'd been stressed and worried about things which were in my control, but I was simply blowing out of proportion. So things like, for example, am I making the right decisions when it comes to running my own business? Should I just go and get a job in an office somewhere and be miserable but have a steady paycheck? Am I, in that sense, a reliable husband and potential father and all this sort of stuff? I was, living with that sort of worry, but also on top of that, and some related, niggling worries and stresses, I was also living with the effects of basically 30 years of being an older brother in a family where my mum had tremendous personality problems. Especially following my father's death when I was 5, I basically had been a quasi-parental figure for my mum, and that took all sorts of different shapes when I was a very small child. I'm not going to go into gross detail here, but sometimes, for example, having to do food shopping when I was like 6 or 7. As a teenager, having to sort of figure out my own issues that everyone goes through when they're teenagers, but also living with a very unpredictable mum. On the morning of, for example, A-levels exam, I remember one exam in particular, having to physically fight to get out to go and do the exam because of her personality and because she was so scared, sort of for me, I suppose. That manifested in that very sort of physical hurdle in that sense. And then in so many other ways, in much more grim and dark ways as well. There have been moments when I've had to deal with potentially being killed, for example, or moments when I've had to handle extraordinarily intoxicated mum, for example. And so all of that really came to a head a few years ago at my brother's wedding. Because I've been keeping it together for the wedding, for his sake, despite the fact that my mum couldn't make it to our wedding, unfortunately. She had incapacitated herself. I held it together for his wedding, but then afterwards I made a decision, following a bit of a rough evening actually with her, having sort of basically minded her. I made a decision to step back and let her try and be an adult on her own without any intensive support from me. And that even that though wasn't easy, and that led to a tremendous awareness of that, so that led to me trying to find ways to deal with not diving back into a very stressful situation, but therefore handling the extraordinary stress of, I suppose, actually the fallout of 30 years, but also the stress of not falling back into the habit, if you see what I mean, of dealing with some difficult problems. or no, sorry, trying to help someone else deal with some significant problems. And as a grown-up, I think there are two main ways that this sort of stuff tends to manifest. Well, actually, I suppose there are more than two. I could have become, for example, a bit violent. For example, with the people that I loved. I didn't do that. I could have eaten tons of ridiculous food, and I suppose I did comfort eat a little bit, but not excessively. I mean, you know, I had some control there. I could have drunk too much. But having experienced that as a kid, been on the wrong end of that, as it were, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to fall back on alcohol. That's not something I wanted to do. So I ended up falling back on ginger ale, which sounds really strange, but yeah, ginger ale was the thing. It was fizzy, kind of had that kind of grown-up sort of beery sort of texture to it. You know, when you're drinking it. Had quite a pleasing flavour. Ginger is one of my favourite flavours, and it said, you know, low sugar. So I thought, oh, this is fine. It'll be fine. But unbeknownst to me, I was doing the worst thing possible for my health in that sense. Well, no, the worst thing possible, I suppose, would have been like Class A drugs or alcohol, I guess, or something worse. But what, you know, this was not a benign stress busting solution, is what I'm getting at. So after basically 2 years of chugging ginger ale in an effort to not go down the path of drinking whiskey all the time, I, it seems, had just pushed my blood sugars up and up and up. Because when something says sugar free, it doesn't mean that it's glucose free. It doesn't mean that you're not introducing sugars into your bloodstream. And you know, come the summer last year, I was starting to manifest symptoms of diabetes. Now, diabetes actually, it means, the word comes from the idea of pass through, and the idea is that is often one of the early symptoms of diabetes is that you just need the loo all the time, but also you're constantly thirsty as well. And last summer, this time last year in fact, in the build up to my birthday, I was the thirstiest I've ever been in my life. It wasn't even as though it was like a hot, you know, I didn't feel like there was that kind of hot summer's day thirst, oh, I'll just have a nice glass of iced tea or something, or, you know, glass of water, or even a slush puppy. You know, the sort of the ice with all the sugary syrup in. I used to have lots of that as well in the summer to try and de-stress. Again, not good for blood sugars. It was a thirst that was the worst cotton mouth I've ever experienced. It was just chronic. And obviously that meant I was drinking loads. So I was drinking more and more ginger ale, more and more slush puppies, some water. I've never really been big on Coca-Cola and stuff like that, or, you know, fizzy pop. So thankfully I wasn't doubling down on that stuff. But, you know, this was just getting worse. And so the more sugar I took in through liquid, the quicker it gets into your bloodstream, into my bloodstream, I guess. And that meant that my poor kidneys were trying to get rid of sugar by excreting more and more liquid. Just get it out, get it out, get it out. And so I was constantly thirsty, and therefore almost constantly needing the loo. And this really got bad last summer when I was doing some filming for an archaeological project in the south of England, and I couldn't be more than 50 meters away from a loo, basically. And I was trying not to let anyone know. I just thought I might have some sort of infection. I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to go and get this dealt with, like antibiotics or something. But I found myself in a field between the dig site and the base camp, or one of the dig sites and the base camp, and I just couldn't hold it in. So I just needed to go to the loo. I found a bush, went to the toilet there, and it really got bad on the way back from that film trip when in the train. So it was like a three leg train journey. On the first leg, I was in a train that I thought didn't have a toilet. I thought it was just like two carriages. That sometimes, small train lines, small, lesser used routes will sometimes have trains without loos. like North Wales. Sometimes when I'm going home from uni, when I used to do that, sometimes the train wouldn't have a loo. And I thought it didn't, and I was just sitting there desperate, just rocking back and forward, but I couldn't get off the train at the station and get the next train because I had a certain ticket schedule to stick to. And eventually I just said to the conductor, is there any chance of stopping the train just for a second? I really, And he goes, well, there's a toilet on board. So I went there, and sadly someone had locked themselves in the loo to try and avoid the ticket inspector. They were trying to scam a free, couple of stops. They're like a teenager or something trying to go to the shops. And this was the lowest point in this whole experience. Was I found myself utterly incapable of holding it in any longer. And so between carriages, thankfully, this was one of those trains where they had like the old rubber sort of concertina thing between the train carriages with a little gap. And I remembered, being a historian myself, I remembered, oh, people used to go to the loo in that bit, and it would just sort of, the hole would act as a drain. I thought, I'm just going to have to do that. The desperation was just immense. No grown-up wants to wet themselves, but I did. Between two carriage doors, I was in this rubber little section, and I just had to go. And but when I got to the train station where I was getting off to get the next train, thankfully it had been such a volume of liquid that actually my shorts looked one colour. They were so completely wet that no one was going, oh look at that, stain or something. It was just no one else knew, but I knew. It was deeply embarrassing, and so thankfully I had a change of clothes with me. I've been staying overnight at this archaeological project, so I got changed in the loo, and thankfully all the other trains had toilets, so it was fine. But something had to change, and this problem was getting worse and worse and worse, and we just booked our first holiday abroad as a married couple. Well, frankly, as a couple, ever since I've known my wife. We haven't been abroad on holiday. Not that we expect to. We're not one of those people who go, oh, we haven't been abroad this year. We did it, but we thought we're going to treat ourselves. Let's go. Let's get this last minute booking to Rhodes in the Mediterranean. And I'm in the airport, thirsty as hell, drinking, and looking back on it, it's just the worst thing I could have done was that I was drinking the free top-ups of 7-Up. So basically sugar water, just downing this stuff because I was so thirsty. And we both knew. I remember, we were both sat there having a sandwich before we got on the plane, and we both knew something was wrong. That I was poorly in some way, but we were going to try and have the best holiday that we could. And the plane journey was just terrible. I was getting up every few minutes to use the loo, but I couldn't stop drinking water or drinking liquid. So again, I was asking for lemonade. I was asking, and this tends to be the stuff that's available is the stuff that's got sugar in it, which is really frustrating as well. Looking back, even if I'd known, it would have been hard to avoid the sugar. But anyway, so we're on holiday. We're in Rhodes, and we're by the pool on the second day of the holiday, and this was just so welcome, just doing nothing, sitting on a chair by a pool. It was fantastic. And then I got a phone call from a GP because I had been to see the doctor a couple of days before we flew, and that's when I had my first ever blood test. And I hate needles. I have such bad experiences with needles. But it's my first ever blood test, and I'd just reached the age of 33. So on my birthday, one of my presents was my first ever needle in the arm to take blood, and that's quite an achievement. I know there are lots of people who don't make it to 33 without having a blood test. So yeah, that was pretty good. But also as well, it was doubly significant for me because sadly my dad died on his 33rd birthday. So on that day, I was aware that he died on that day, and I wasn't ready to die when I was 33 on the 33rd birthday, so I was very sad about that. I was also somehow relieved, if you know what I mean, that I was still alive, if that makes sense. But there was this unknown illness. Might I end up having something that's going to kill me or something? So having this blood test on my birthday, it was good and bad at the same time. So anyway, so the results come back. The GP calls me and just says, "Oh, hi." Hello. Yeah, I'm just calling just to let you know, your blood sugars are really quite high. It's 121. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? I don't know what these numbers mean. Well, we like to aim for between 50 and 53, so pretty high. And she was calling because and her name was Dr. Eclair, actually, a wonderful doctor. Great name as well, Eclair. She was calling because she was concerned that with blood sugars that high, I could just go into a coma. I could just go to sleep and not wake up. So she's just saying that if something happens while you're on holiday, you've been diagnosed type 2 diabetes. As soon as you get back, we're going to talk about treatment and blah 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 blah. And so immediately, while on holiday, actually our reaction, me and my wife, our reaction was well, that's a relief. Now we know. I was relieved that it wasn't like, as with my father, unfortunately he died of bowel cancer. I was relieved that it wasn't that. I was like, oh, it's not cancer. I can deal with that. And so immediately we started cutting out, so it was a all-inclusive package holiday. So cutting out the complimentary sugary drinks, cutting out the complimentary biscuits, with your cups of tea and cake and things like that. Although I did have a couple of puddings, and obviously you can't cut everything out because you need to have a balance. But just being aware of this stuff meant that there was an immediate effect, and that was I stopped needing the loo all the time. It was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful to be able to, for example, sleep most of the night, and just have a normal wake up and go, oh, I need the loo, as opposed to just getting up all night, every night, to go to the loo. I had my first solid night's sleep while on holiday. I started to feel much less stressed, much less concerned, and actually we were able to, for example, go on walks now. We could just go on a 2-mile walk and come back, and I wouldn't be like, oh, where's the loo? I need the loo. So the diagnosis was wonderful. But then when we got back, it was fairly intensive, because of those numbers, fairly intensive discussions and treatment and preparation. And I have to say, my experience of all that stuff has been not the best. And this may well be because, my experience of one particular aspect of that stuff, has been not the best. And that is the sort of the awareness training you have to go on. So basically my GP said, okay, here's a great website, here's some great information, study this stuff, learn it, and this will help you. And so we did what we were asked to do. But then we had to go on, and so they sort of, if you don't go, you get like a did not attend kind of black mark on your medical record. We had to go on a supplementary diabetes education and awareness course, which was just the worst. It was patronizing when it came to food preparation. So saying things like, now don't drink too much Coca-Cola. And you're like, okay, I don't anyway. But obviously, instead of Coke, I was drinking ginger ale. But nonetheless, because we'd done the research we were asked to do, we kind of picked up on that. But also, they couldn't answer any of our questions. So, for example, especially my wife, she was feeling awful at this point. She was saying, things like carbs, potato. Sometimes, being Northern Irish, she loves putting mashed potato into things. And the people were saying, well, you have to have carbs, you have to have mashed potato. It's all about balance. And we were both asking, well, what does balance mean in this context? Is there a ratio? Is there a set amount of carbs? Is it related to, for example, your existing diet or your body mass or your energy output? Give us a give us a frickin' bone. And they couldn't answer these questions. They just kept on saying it's all about balance, and that was a meaningless phrase in the context of wanting to understand what that balance was, what was being balanced, if you see what I mean. They didn't, and we're both fairly clever people. I mean, we weren't being dumb. They just weren't. I think they just weren't aware of the fact. I don't know what was going on. Maybe they just knew this stuff so well that they knew what they meant, and everyone knows this, don't they? Maybe that was it, or maybe it was, and I suspect it was the case, that they had basically learned this by rote and were passing on. It's all about balance, with a slightly sort of cross-eyed kind of, it's all about balance, unthinking way, I suppose. But so that wasn't the best experience. But the medication, doing more exercise, we've got a basketball net in the backyard and all this sort of stuff, because I love my basketball. It's been great actually having a full-size basketball net. I've always wanted one of those things. Now I have one. Putting all this stuff in place, completely cutting out the sugary drinks, basically. Definitely cutting out things like jelly babies, which now I just look at like, if someone offers me a jelly bean or something, I just go, that's just a capsule of pure sugar. I don't need that. And actually cutting out some of the videos where I've been trying these hyper sugary American sweets, in these sort of Brit tries. For example, I mean, I've got Jolly Ranchers and Twinkies packets just above me there on the set. Cutting out that stuff just had an immediate, more or less immediate effect as well. And after 3 months, they did a supplementary blood test. And, after 6 weeks they did a blood test, sorry. And the number had gone down from 121 to 97, which was, they said, pretty good. Yeah, pretty good jump, but nonetheless, obviously, some distance to go. But then, after a total of 3 months of being on medication, so 6 weeks plus another 1.5 months, I guess, the number had come down to 51, literally in the middle of that green zone, of that "this is where we want you to be" area. And they actually, frankly, they were astonished, in fact. And this was all, if you recall, this was all in the context of in January, Mum passing away, and then all of that time has been taken up with me travelling and staying, for example, with my brother-in-law. When he just goes, "There's no food in the house, let's just get a takeaway." So often not having control over what we're going to eat. In the context of all of that stuff, the number was normal, and biochemically, as it were, the effects of diabetes are no longer with me. My most recent blood test was a couple last week. Just about getting over the bruise that they gave me by accident. She just happened to jab the vein one too many times, and it just bled out into my arm. But just that most recent blood test, the number was 51 again. So I'm in perfect balance, and once more, and what a I hate the word, but what a journey. What the place I was in mentally, the place I was in, as it were, in terms of my biochemistry, and the fact that I had that this whole transition also encompassed Mum passing away, and the fact that actually we're still technically dealing with it. There's still forms, and there's something on the table I need to do today, actually, to chase up on. I'm thankful for my doctor. I'm very thankful for my wife in supporting me, and I'm just relieved that we identified this, got on top of it, and ended up now. It's managed by medication. There's I've got a packet of pills on the table just over, just there on my desk. But soon I may not even need that medication. So from a point of just alarmingly high sugars, somehow in the past 10 months, with a bit of focus, a bit of dedication, a bit of awareness, I suppose, of what I was doing and what I was ingesting, and also what is available to you in terms of options when you go out and about. In Newcastle, it's really hard actually just to get water. Like, obviously you can ask for tap water when you're in like a cafe or something, but if you're just going, if you just go into a newsagent's because you're thirsty because it's a hot day, it's really hard to get hold of stuff that isn't just sugar or sugar laden in some places anyway. I found the places to get water, and that's been part of this. But it's been fascinating, and I simply had to talk about it today, because on the one hand it was embarrassing when I was going through it. I didn't want to mention it, I didn't want to highlight it, I didn't want to, because diabetes is an old person's disease. Diabetes is the sort of thing that these huge these sort of shocking cases you see in the United States. This is the sort of stuff that happens. I didn't want to share it because I was embarrassed. But now, not just because my numbers are normal, but now I feel like I wanted to talk about it, because it's easy to fall into. It seems it's easy to sort of trap yourself in a situation where you get the balance. It's all about the balance. Where you get the balance wrong, and you're not even aware of it until it's bad. Until the symptoms are really showing. I suppose I'd end this video just by saying I would encourage you, if you do enter a period of your life where you are extraordinarily stressed, not to fall back on anything that you ingest to calm you down. Exercise, a bit of therapy. In the past few months I have been going, for example, to talking therapy, this kind of thing, and reaching out to friends and family. That would be my recommendation. But also as well, if you are in that sort of situation where maybe you think diabetes is creeping up on you, I can completely understand why it's embarrassing. But the embarrassment, as with so many illnesses and conditions, the embarrassment is momentary, and it's fleeting compared to your health. So definitely get it checked out if you're concerned, and do something about it. Because I could have limped on. I could have limped on for a lot more, much longer, if I had to. I could have sort of hidden it by just being strategic with toilet breaks and this kind of thing. But thankfully, I just about had the wherewithal to seek answers, and with those answers came the strategy to deal with it. Anyway, I don't know how long this video's been. It's probably longer than my normal videos, and hopefully this has been interesting, possibly partly entertaining, and hopefully beyond that, hopefully it's useful to someone out there to hear this story. As ever guys, until next time, do take care.